Did you know that 80% of new fantasy writers fail to create characters that readers truly connect with? It's not because they don't have great ideas, it's because they make one or more simple mistakes that kill their character development. These mistakes can stop your story from being memorable, even if your world building is fantastic. Here's the shocking part: the characters are often the only thing readers remember long after they've closed the book. In a survey, 75% of readers said they would read a book again if they loved the characters, even if the plot wasn't perfect. This shows how powerful strong characters are to the success of a story. In this video, we'll uncover 6 of the most common character mistakes new writers make. From perfect heroes to one-dimensional villains, I'll show you how to fix these issues with simple, yet powerful strategies that will make your characters unforgettable. Stay tuned to discover how to avoid these traps and build characters that will have your readers hooked from the first page to the last. Chapter 1: The Hero's Trap. Making your protagonist too perfect. One of the biggest mistakes new fantasy writers make is creating a protagonist who's just too perfect. This might seem like a good idea at first. After all, who wouldn't want to write a flawless hero? But here's the thing: perfect characters are often boring and hard to relate to. Real people have flaws, doubts, and imperfections, and that's what makes them interesting. Think about Harry Potter. Sure, he's a great wizard, but he also struggles with self-doubt, anger, and the weight of expectations. He's not perfect, and that's why we connect with him. According to research, readers prefer characters who seem real, with both strengths and weaknesses. A hero without flaws is a hero with no room for growth. And in fantasy, growth is key. Your protagonist should face challenges that force them to evolve. They need to make mistakes and learn from them. For example, Aragorn in The Lord of the Rings starts as a reluctant leader. His journey is about overcoming self-doubt and stepping into his true role as king. It's also important to give your protagonist internal struggles. These make them more relatable. Think of Frodo Baggins. He's physically small and weak compared to the other characters, but his internal battle with the ring is what makes his journey compelling. His flaws, like his fear and doubt, make him more human. Another trick is to give your protagonist a specific weakness that's relevant to the plot. This creates tension. In The Name of the Wind, Kvorta's arrogance often leads him into trouble, and that flaw plays a huge part in his story arc. So, don't be afraid to let your hero fail now and then. Finally, think about balance. A great protagonist isn't just a bundle of flaws, they also have strengths. But those strengths shouldn't make them invincible. Even Superman, the perfect hero, has his kryptonite. Make sure your hero has weaknesses that complement their strengths, creating a dynamic, multi-dimensional character. Chapter 2: The Villain Void. When your antagonist is just a plot device, the villain is just as important as the hero. If your antagonist is flat or one-dimensional, the whole story suffers. It's tempting to make villains evil for the sake of being evil, but this rarely works in fantasy. A great antagonist should have a clear motivation and backstory. In A Song of Ice and Fire, George R.R. Martin shows us that even the most terrible villains have layers. Take Cersei Lannister, for example. She might seem like a power-hungry, vindictive queen, but her deep fear of losing control stems from her own childhood. This complexity makes her compelling, even when we disagree with her choices. Your villain needs to be more than just a plot device. They should have their own goals, and sometimes these goals can even align with the protagonist's. In The Lord of the Rings, Sauron is a constant threat, but he's also a symbol of the destructive potential of power. The struggle isn't just between good and evil, but between different visions for the world. A good villain is often a mirror to the hero. Where the hero struggles with self-doubt, the villain might struggle with an overconfidence that leads to their downfall. Think of Darth Vader. His journey from hero to villain and back is a constant struggle with power, identity, and regret. It's also crucial to give your antagonist a moral standpoint, even if we don't agree with it. Thanos in Avengers: Infinity War isn't just a monster. He genuinely believes that wiping out half of the universe will save it from collapse. This twisted logic makes him more terrifying because his actions have purpose. Finally, let your antagonist grow as well. Just like your hero, they should have moments of vulnerability or change. This not only makes them more realistic, but it also adds depth to the conflict. A villain who remains static feels less believable and less engaging. Chapter 3: The Silent Sidekick. When supporting characters fade into the background, supporting characters are often seen as the side players in a fantasy story, but they should never feel like mere background noise. They're there for a reason, and they should have their own arcs and motivations. When secondary characters are flat, the whole world feels less alive. In The Hobbit, characters like Legolas, Gimli, and even Bilbo's own company of dwarves have distinct personalities that play into the larger plot. They're not just there to help Bilbo along his journey. Each one has their own growth and role to play. Supporting characters also help flesh out the world you're building. If your protagonist is the only well-developed character, the world feels artificial. Readers want to see the diversity and complexity of the world through its people. This is especially true in fantasy, where different races, cultures, and magic systems come into play. Give your side characters their own flaws, strengths, and goals. These characters don't need to overshadow the protagonist, but they should have their own purpose in the story. Think of Samwise Gamgee. He's not the main hero, but his loyalty and bravery make him essential to Frodo's journey. Also, don't forget the power of relationships. Secondary characters should influence the protagonist's decisions and growth. The bond between Frodo and Sam is central to The Lord of the Rings. Their friendship drives the plot forward and adds emotional depth to the story. Supporting characters can also bring out aspects of your protagonist's personality. For example, in the Wheel of Time series, Perrin Abar's struggle with his inner wolf parallels his development as a leader. His interactions with his friends and the world around him shape his growth just as much as his internal journey. The key here is to give every character, no matter how minor, a reason to exist. Whether it's a funny sidekick who adds levity or a mysterious figure who sparks the hero's curiosity, each one should have a role that enhances the plot. Secondary characters aren't just for filling in space, they're essential to creating a dynamic, immersive world. Don't forget to subscribe for more tips and tricks on creating unforgettable characters in your fantasy writing. Chapter 4: The Mysterious Past Syndrome. Overusing the dark secret trope. A character with a dark, mysterious past is a popular trope in fantasy, but it's often overdone. While the idea of a hidden history can add intrigue, relying on this too much can make your story feel formulaic. Instead of focusing on a character's tragic past as the driving force, consider how their past shapes their present actions. In The Wheel of Time, Randalph's mysterious origins are central to his character. However, it's not just the secret of his heritage that defines him, it's how he grapples with the weight of destiny and his relationships with others. His past is important, but his internal struggle, choices, and growth take center stage. This makes him a more engaging and multi-dimensional character. A dark secret shouldn't define a character's entire arc. In fact, over-explaining or dragging out the mystery can backfire. Readers quickly lose interest if every plot point hinges on uncovering the past. Instead, focus on how the character's past impacts their decisions and relationships. The key is subtlety. Rather than making the dark secret the character's defining feature, show how it influences their behavior. Think of Jon Snow in Game of Thrones. The mystery of his parentage is important, but his personal growth, values, and loyalty drive the story more than any secret. You can also avoid the overused dark past trope by showing a character's evolution over time. Instead of giving him a mysterious background from the start, slowly reveal details as the story progresses. This keeps readers hooked and avoids the feeling of being hit with an info dump. Finally, consider shifting focus away from the past and onto the present. What matters more is how a character changes throughout the story. Make sure their journey, rather than their hidden past, is what truly defines them. When you do reveal details about their past, make sure it serves the character's growth rather than being the sole focus. Chapter 5: The All-Knowing Oracle. Avoiding exposition dump characters in fantasy writing, there's a temptation to use an all-knowing character who explains the plot to the reader. These exposition dump characters often show up as wise old mentors or magical beings with vast knowledge. While they can be useful, over-relying on them can make your story feel lazy. In The Lord of the Rings, Gandalf is a powerful wizard with vast knowledge. But he doesn't just dump all the answers on the characters. Instead, he guides them, offering clues and insights at key moments. This creates a sense of mystery and tension, as the characters must work through challenges without having all the answers handed to them. The trick is to avoid making a character an information dispenser. Rather than using a character to explain everything, show the world through action, dialogue, and experience. In Harry Potter, Dumbledore often provides guidance, but he doesn't tell Harry exactly what to do. He helps Harry learn through his own experiences. Exposition is important, but it needs to be woven into the story naturally. Avoid large blocks of text where a character explains the world in one go. Instead, sprinkle the details throughout the narrative. This keeps the story moving and ensures that information is revealed in a way that feels organic. Another way to avoid over-reliance on exposition dump characters is to let the characters learn by doing. In The Name of the Wind, Kavith doesn't just hear about the magic, he actively practices and struggles with it. This adds depth and realism to the world building, making it feel lived in and authentic. Instead of one character knowing everything, spread knowledge around. Let the protagonist discover things through research, dialogue, or trial and error. This makes the story more engaging because it allows the reader to uncover the world alongside the characters. Finally, if you do have a character who's knowledgeable, don't make them too perfect. Every mentor should have weaknesses or biases that impact their advice. This keeps them human and relatable, rather than just a tool for the plot. Chapter 6, The One-Dimensional Fantasy Race. Breaking stereotypes and adding depth. Fantasy often relies on familiar races like elves, dwarves, and orcs. These races come with their own set of stereotypes. Elves are wise, dwarves are gruff, orcs are evil. While these stereotypes are part of what makes fantasy so iconic, relying too heavily on them can make your world feel shallow and one-dimensional. In The Lord of the Rings, the elves may seem to follow the typical, wise and ancient, trope, but characters like Legolas break this mold. He's not just a calm, perfect elf, he has personal struggles, a deep bond with his friends, and even moments of vulnerability. This complexity makes him far more engaging than a simple archetype. To break free from stereotypes, think about the history and culture of each race. Why do elves value wisdom? What events shape the dwarves' fierce pride? How do orcs view honor and leadership? By considering the unique histories and cultures of these races, you can give them depth and make them feel more real. It's also important to avoid painting entire races with a broad brush. Just because a character is an orc doesn't mean they must be evil. In the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin, the orc-like stone eaters have their own complex motives and personalities. By giving these characters their own motivations, Jemisin breathes new life into the concept of monstrous races. Each race in your fantasy world should have internal diversity, too. Not all elves should be serene and wise, and not all dwarves should be gruff and hard-working. Think about how individual personalities within each race could challenge or redefine the stereotypes. This adds realism to your world and gives your readers more diverse characters to root for. Moreover, don't forget about the emotional aspects. How does being an elf or a dwarf shape their worldview? Do they feel isolated because of their race, or do they revel in their unique qualities? The way a character relates to their race can add layers to their personal struggles and growth. Breaking stereotypes also means making sure races are not just defined by their magical abilities or physical traits. Instead, think about their philosophy, relationships, and how they navigate the world around them. This will add richness to your world building and create a more immersive reading experience. Lastly, think about how races interact with each other. Conflict between races isn't just about physical battles. It can also involve differing ideologies, values, and worldviews. This creates a complex web of relationships that adds depth to the story. If you found these tips helpful, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell for more expert advice on writing unforgettable fantasy characters.